Fort McHenry is a star-shaped stronghold guarding the entrance to Baltimore's inner harbor. In the 1800s, this fort was the linchpin of the city's defenses. On September the 13th of 1814, British warships launched a relentless 25-hour bombardment of Fort McHenry. Over 1,500 bombs, rockets, and cannonballs rained down on the city's defenders. 1,000 American soldiers under the command of Major George Armistead. These warriors held firm, preventing the British from advancing. In the dawn's early light on September the 14th, their Star-Spangled Banner did yet wave, but their victory came at a cost. And oh, say can you see that some of Baltimore's defenders do still stand watch over the land of the free and the home of the brave. Today, we are exploring the haunted stories of those soldiers who never fully left.
Immortal Sunshine.
Hello and welcome to the podcast shedding candlelight on cryptids, hauntings, mythology, and more. This is your host, Lee Donna, and I have been on a ghost kick lately, so we are going to continue this theme with a patriotic episode to honor the 250th birthday of the United States. A celebration we get to have because of the brave and determined to be free people who have and do defend our nation and our rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Locust Point, located in Baltimore, Maryland, is a peninsula that juts out into the Patapsco River, creating a strategic bend in this river that flows into Baltimore's inner harbor. In 1798, construction began on a fort that would add brick and masonry to expand and fortify the earthen stronghold that already existed on this strategic point. In 1803, the pentagonal bastion-style fort, typical of its time, was completed and commissioned to serve as a coastal defense to guard the entrance to Baltimore's inner harbor. This made the fort the linchpin of the city's defenses. If you could get your warships past this fort, you could seize control of the city. The fort was named after James McHenry, a man who served as the Secretary of War under Presidents Washington and Adams. In June of 1812, the United States declared war on England over free trade and sailors' rights. This war is known today as the War of 1812. Fort McHenry became iconic in this war, but not until 1814 when British warships arrived in the Chesapeake Bay. The British found some success early on, namely their invasion and burning of Washington, D.C. Then the British let that success go to their heads and decided they would also take Baltimore, America's then third largest city and a very vital port. On September the 13th of 1814, the British Royal Navy, what was then the most powerful navy in the world, began their 25-hour-long assault on Fort McHenry, painting the skies above the heads of the roughly 1,000 American troops who were stationed there with the rockets' red glare and bombs bursting in air. In the dawn's early light on September the 14th of 1814, a lawyer aboard a neutral ship sitting out in the water a safe distance away beheld a sight so glorious that it inspired him to write a poem. He penned what would later become our country's national anthem, the Star-Spangled Banner. For he saw, in spite of the best efforts of the British, that our American flag defiantly and proudly did yet still wave. The Battle of Baltimore did not go well for the Brits, but not all of our American defenders lived through the night. Today, Fort McHenry is a national monument managed by the National Park Service. Visitors to the park and the staff who work there claim that some of the fort's soldiers never left, that their ghostly forms still march atop the walls, looking over the bay, ready to defend her still today. One of the most named souls still walking the halls of Fort McHenry is a 34-year-old lieutenant from a prominent and respected Baltimore family. This family was involved in imports and privateering, so basically the exact things this war was being fought over. Lieutenant Levi Claggett and his team were assigned to Bastion 3. Bastion meaning one of the 5 star-shaped points that make up the overall shape of Fort McHenry. Claggett and the others were on this bastion manning a cannon in what is referred to as a gun encampment, which is basically the 19th century version of a heavy artillery foxhole, the encampment being a fortified platform where soldiers load, aim, and fire their cannons while staying somewhat protected by the fort's walls. The cannon positions were exposed enough to fire effectively at ships in the harbor, but left vulnerable to incoming fire, and that is exactly what happened to Bastion 3 on September the 13th of 1814. Lieutenant Levi Claggett was killed instantly when a British ship scored a direct hit on his gun emplacement. One of his cannon's wheels broke when the British mortar exploded, and according to reports, the cannon then fell on top of Lieutenant Claggett, crushing him. Bastion 3 is now often referred to as Claggett's Bastion or Claggett's Battery. However, several other soldiers on Bastion 3 also died in that direct hit. Men like Sergeant John Clem, who was killed by shrapnel. Claggett, being from a prominent family, had a notable death that warranted a public obituary and funeral parade, which made the story of his death a well-documented and widely known one. So, when Fort McHenry staff and visitors began routinely seeing a soldier pacing along Bastion 3, who was dressed in the blue coat and the white pants of the U.S. Army uniform that was used only briefly and specifically during the Battle of Baltimore, Lieutenant Levi Claggett was top of mind. He is even sometimes seen with other soldiers, all of them dressed alike and reporting for duty on their point of the star. Over the years, many visitors have captured what appears to be a uniformed figure in the exact spot where Claggett and his fellow soldiers lost their lives. Since their uniforms were only briefly in use by the Army, it is not one that is common among reenactors. And when the soldiers wearing this rare garb are seen, there are never any reenactors or staff anywhere nearby. One detailed account by a staff member even describes seeing a figure wearing this uniform strolling across the bastion when the fort was closed. Footsteps, cold spots, and voices are also tied to that area, as well as the echo of cannon fire. However, Bastion 3 is not the only place in the fort where apparitions appear in photos with visitors. And even the park rangers report seeing, hearing, and feeling the same things that the visitors do. Spectral soldiers in uniform, disembodied voices, footsteps in empty rooms, echoes of battle, furniture moving on its own, and sudden cold spots. And many of these things are reported over and over, almost verbatim, as people attempt to explain the supernatural experiences they had at Fort McHenry. In the late 1970s, back when I was born, a psychic named Dorothy Bathgate was known for doing paranormal investigations. She would visit Fort McHenry after hours and walk the grounds with the staff, describing to them the historical details of the fort. She would tell them locations of old burials and about traumatic events that took place within those walls. During one particular seance at Fort McHenry, Dorothy described a bearded man being among their dead. The man she described did not exactly fit with what the American soldiers would have looked like. Later, an obituary was uncovered that proved the psychic was right. There was a bearded man among their dead, a Jewish merchant who had been delivering goods to the fort. But not every ghost upon the walls of Fort McHenry is a soldier who died in the Battle of Baltimore. In 1880, Private John Drew was a U.S. Army soldier stationed at Fort McHenry. One evening, he was on guard duty, tasked with patrolling the ramparts, something he could not quite do while he was sleeping, which is what John was caught doing. He was arrested and confined to one of the fort's prison cells as punishment. John was later found deceased in his cell and by his own hand. The story says that John was overwhelmed with shame for having let his fellow soldiers down by not doing his part to ensure they all remained safe. He was embarrassed, and sleeping while on guard duty was a pretty serious offense. One version of John's story says that one of the soldiers guarding the cells left his weapon sitting in a location where John was able to reach out of his cell and steal the man's weapon. Today, it is speculated that John's spirit is restless in its guilt. He can be found patrolling the same part of the fort where he had been found sleeping. The apparition still wearing the uniform that was in style during the time when John Drew was alive. The trauma of what John felt in his last fleshly moments, driving his spirit to stand guard for all eternity. When John's spirit is not on duty standing guard over the fort, he can be found in his cell, his spirit always waiting for his next chance at redemption. In the late 1970s, clearly one of the best decades in history, a man named Warren was serving as the director of visitor services at Fort McHenry. He was frustrated because visitors and other park staff were having all of these paranormal encounters, and he was having none. But Warren became friends with our psychic, Dorothy Bathgate. During one of her after hours visits, Warren decided to test whether or not the apparition being repeatedly reported at the guardhouse where John Drew was rumored to be pacing was actually John. Warren called out, "John, if that's you, send us a message." In the quiet seconds that followed, the group gathered with Warren and Dorothy heard a distinct tap, like a fingernail tapping on glass, coming from the window of the guardhouse, 15 feet away. In 1996, the Baltimore Sun wrote an article that documented Warren's experience. He said there had been no one in the guardhouse that night, no animals, no obvious source for the noise he heard. Warren believed the tapping had indeed been a direct response from Private John Drew, attesting that he was still there, proving his worth, and finding redemption in serving his country for all eternity. Fort McHenry has a history of not only being a military stronghold, but it was utilized as a prison, most notably during the Civil War, and it was also used as a medical facility. So, while most of the sightings are of soldiers and interactions with the other side are connected to those who remain at Fort McHenry out of a sense of duty or redemption, there is activity linked to the fort's broader history, and this activity stands in stark contrast to the heroic duty and sacrifice of those soldiers who gave their lives in defense of Baltimore and their nation. In true female fashion, when we ladies come back to haunt the halls, it is with vengeance in mind. For decades, visitors and staff have felt unexplained chills or a heavy presence in certain areas of Fort McHenry. Visual sightings again range from full bodied apparitions of uniformed soldiers to floating figures. And these reports have remained consistent with their retellings passed down through park rangers on candlelight tours that were held during the Halloween season in the 1970s through the 1990s, until the Park Service decided they should not be telling the public about the footsteps heard in empty rooms or the soldiers marching in areas where no living person is present. The fun events were discontinued, and rangers were told to stop talking about hauntings because the Park Service felt they were overemphasizing the supernatural. And the Park Service just wanted to move away from that, not encourage people, because we are all very serious people and super professional. So we don't talk about things that we all know are true. It makes us look bad. Or maybe the Park Service had a different motivation for denying the truth. They were not out to ruin anyone's fun. What they wanted was to avoid a lawsuit, which is pure theory on my part. So hear me out and draw your own conclusions. The Star-Spangled Banshee is a female entity, and as her name would suggest, she is hostile. Those unfortunate people who encounter this woman describe her as a woman in white, which is a common motif in ghost stories featuring women, though sometimes she is reported to be only a shadowy figure, and at other times she is merely an invisible force. In any form, the woman is unsettling and creates an oppressive presence that overwhelms people with a sense of dread. In some of her most frightening reports, people claim to be shoved, and some even blame the banshee for pushing them down the stairs. A few have even said the dramatic woman knocked them unconscious during an attack. So, of course, the Park Service does not want their employees talking about the banshee like woman haunting their halls. She is hurting people, and no one has any idea why, because no one has any idea who she is. There is speculation that the woman is the wife of a non commissioned officer whose children died in the 1820s epidemic at the fort. Others say she is a grieving widow, heartbroken, and turning her sorrow into rage against the living. Then there is the hospital connection and the many nurses who were stationed there. But there are those who speculate that the Star-Spangled Banshee is an ancient spirit awakened by the ravages of war upon the land, the intense emotions of battle soaking into the earth and stone, causing the spirit to rise, to protect the fort, the flag, to punish. No one really knows what the presence would mean if it was or is an ancient spirit. Many like to call this woman a protective spirit of the flag itself and say that she was awakened not by the ravages of war, but by the patriotic fervor of the soldiers stationed at Fort McHenry, that she rose to defend them and to this very day remains at the ready. If that is her true origin, a woman born of the red, white, and blue, then I would ask those who have been assaulted, what is in their hearts? I personally think it's more likely that she is a woman scorned, her own tragic history tied to the fort. But either way, her wells are said to echo across the walls of the fort on windy nights. Whether she is mourning her children or mourning the fallen, you can hear her banshee cries, and encounters with her are the most frightening accounts coming from Fort McHenry. In a place where so many died defending liberty, it is no surprise that trauma lingers. War leaves scars on the land as well as on the people. Fear, defiance, national pride, all of these things mix with the layers of suffering added to the fort during its time as a prison and hospital, as well as adding more potential suspects for who is haunting Fort McHenry. While the Star-Spangled Banshee is an active haunting, many of the others are considered residual, meaning the entity is repeating a pattern of actions over and over, like the guards pacing back and forth. Residual hauntings are like an echo or a looped recording of past events, where a spirit is repeating actions from an event because that event is being replayed over and over at a certain place or time. These events are often traumatic and can either be happening because of the consciousness of the involved spirit or without the spirit being conscious of what's happening at all. These events being replayed are why witnesses often hear the sounds that were taking place around the event. Whispers, shouting, cannon fire, music. Sometimes witnesses even feel the emotions surrounding the spirit in the recurring event. This is different than the common theme of a ghost not realizing they have passed on, which makes them stick around doing the same things in death that they did in life. Residual hauntings are even different than a spirit lingering because they feel duty bound or have unresolved guilt or unfinished business keeping them earthbound. In a residual haunting, we are talking about what was popularized in the 1970s as the stone tape theory. This theory proposes that certain building materials or geological features, particularly quartz, limestone, or other crystalline rock, can absorb and store emotional, energetic imprints from intense events. Those events with trauma, fear, high emotions, explosions, all of the sorts of things that produce a higher than normal energy release, things that make one's adrenaline spike. Under the right conditions, such as humidity, electromagnetic fluctuations, temperature changes, or anniversaries, the stored energy in these conductive materials is stirred or released, causing the stored imprints of the event to then play back like a tape. Thomas Charles Lethbridge was born in 1901 and he died in 1971. During his lifetime, he was a British archaeologist, explorer, and parapsychologist. His later work and ideas focused on fields of energy in the earth and objects. And it was this body of ideas that helped lay the groundwork for residual haunting concepts like the stone tape theory, which got its name from a 1972 BBC drama called The Stone Tape. In his career as a respected archaeologist, T.C. Lethbridge specialized in Anglo Saxon artifacts. He worked at the University of Cambridge Museum of Archaeology and Ethnology. After retiring in 1957, he moved to a remote house in Devon called Hull House and devoted himself to investigating paranormal phenomena, blending his scientific training with personal experiences and experiments. He wrote many popular books on paranormal phenomena, including the 1961 Ghost and Ghoul, which made TC's energy field ideas popular. He proposed that intense emotions, trauma, or significant events could imprint on the surrounding environment, particularly through invisible energy fields associated with natural features like water, forest, mountains, or more broadly, certain materials in any environment. These energy fields act like a recording medium, storing impressions of past events, which sensitive people, or even ordinary people under the right conditions, can later feel, hear, or see. TC believed that every object, and therefore every place, had an associated field that could capture and hold information from history. TC claimed to be skeptical of most spiritual explanations, and that is why he devoted his time to this endeavor so he could come up with a scientific explanation of what he himself had experienced living in a home that was haunted and what so many other people have reported experiencing. He drew on the research behind dowsing, which is science that relies on energetic fields being linked to physical matter and that energy being picked up by other types of physical matter. And he also drew on the ideas of H. Price, who described a psychic ether. H. Price was born in 1899 and passed away in 1984. He was a respected Oxford philosopher, a Wykeham professor of logic, who was well known for his work in analytic philosophy and perception. He was also president of the Society for Physical Research, where he explored ideas about apparitions, survival after death, and hauntings. In 1939, during his presidential address to the Society for Physical Research, a speech that was later published as Haunting and the Psychic Ether Hypothesis, Price proposed the concept of the psychic ether, an intermediary substance or dimension that sits between ordinary physical matter and the mind or the spirit. He claimed that the psychic ether is a type of material that is suspended in space and contains mental like properties consisting of images, ideas, and traces of memory, and that this ether is created by a living mind continuing to independently exist even after the living person who created it dies. This means that, like TC believed, a sensitive person or a regular person under the right conditions can access this ether and see, hear, or feel whatever is stored there. Furthermore, Price suggested that whatever was inside the ether could attach to physical locations or objects, enabling place memories or residual hauntings. Price framed his hypothesis about the psychic ether as a way to explain hauntings without relying on traditional spiritual or supernatural explanations, which is what TC was trying to do as well. Apply a rational, scientific explanation so we can believe in hauntings, because otherwise we just have to believe our lying eyes. TC's work helped bridge archaeology and paranormal research. It remains popular in ghost hunting for explaining non interactive, repetitive hauntings, like many of those happening in Fort McHenry. While his work is regarded as pseudoscience and has many skeptics, his ideas are actually grounded in real science. We know for a fact that rocks and other earth materials can and do store thermal energy. They have thermal inertia specific to their type of material, allowing them to absorb, store, and release heat that was absorbed into them during things like daily temperature swings, fires, and explosions. This thermal inertia is measurable and is used in passive solar design or geothermal systems. In explosions, intense heat could leave localized memory of the blast in nearby stone and earth. Quartz is common in building materials and in the earth, and it generates an electric charge when it is stressed. This stress can be from a direct impact, a vibration, or compression. Explosions, cannon fire, or structural stress during battle could theoretically create electrical signals or charge in quartz bearing rock. Under extreme stress, like seismic activity, these rocks can produce light. It's an anomaly called earthquake lights. Some paranormal theories suggest that this stored charge in quartz could later release under triggers like the fluctuations I mentioned earlier, which would then influence the electromagnetic fields that humans perceive as apparitions or sounds. Studies on infrasound or environmental resonance explore how buildings and soil hold vibrational patterns. They retain echoes of electromagnetic signatures. There are paranormal GIS studies tying areas high in quartz, limestone, or magnetite deposits to higher reports of paranormal activity. Locust Point, where Fort McHenry is located, is part of Maryland's coastal plain province. The earth there is characterized by sedimentary layers, including sand, clay, and gravel, that overlays the older crystalline bedrock of the Piedmont province from further inland. The fort is primarily brick with significant earthen components, but the cornerstones at the angles of the bastions and walls are sandstone, with the composition of the sandstone being primarily quartz grains. The cement is mostly quartz mixed with clay. In the 1830s, some of the sandstone was replaced with granite, but during the battles of Baltimore, the stress points of the fort were quartz rich sandstone, and that quartz was used all over the entire fort, as well as other conductive materials that go all the way down into the earth itself. And then there is the water and the theory that water can carry all of the same information that other materials can, and especially after the massive explosive energy, kinetic, thermal, and acoustic from the 25-hour bombardment. I am not getting into water in this episode because this one is getting long already, but do yourself a favor and look up some research on water because it will blow your mind. Water is not simply H2O. It is not all created equal, and you can put a glass of water in sunlight and it will restructure itself. Or you can place a glass bottle of water near or on a stone and it will change. And if you put a stone in your water, well, prepare to be amazed. If you are a Tokolosh, you will also disappear if you swallow that stone, so do not do that. Just put your water near a rock. Paul Check has a really good series on water. You guys can find him. His name is simple to look up. He's kind of everywhere, and this kind of thing fascinates me. But I will not be talking about the water anymore, and I am also not going to go super hippie talking about crystals and energy. You guys have probably heard lots of talk about crystals and energy. People travel to different places in Arizona just to feel the energy. I have gone to these places. Honestly, when I was in Africa, that's probably the most energy that I felt coming from the earth, which was kind of fascinating because the landscape in Arizona and that in Africa are so similar. And I was in Arizona after I was in Africa, so I was able to make those connections. But at any rate, I'm not going to talk anymore about this. I'm just going to say to you guys that it's all connected and it is all real. Granite deposits are long associated with super weird things and a lot of missing people. So I do believe the earth holds a recording of our history. And maybe, just maybe, under the right environmental triggers, the earth allows souls to come back to us, even if only as a ghostly image without consciousness playing on a reel. The intense trauma and patriotic fervor of the 1814 assault at Fort McHenry might have created strong mental images that were stored both in the fort itself and in the psychic ether, memories hanging there all around the fort, waiting for that day when it might all be released. During patriotic events or around the anniversary of the attack, activity reportedly spikes at Fort McHenry, as if the patriotic energy of our country wakes the spirits. Or maybe it only forces the fort to show them to us. Their presence reminding us that patriotism is not just fireworks and parades, it is resilience in the face of darkness. Have you ever visited Fort McHenry? I will have occasion to be up in that area again soon, so I might go check it out. If you have already been there and the Star-Spangled Banshee reached out and touched you, please, please let me know. You can send your paranormal encounters to leadonabooks@gmail.com. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe and share with your friends. If you like thriller books and fantasy, you can find all of my books in my Shopify store at leadonabooks.com or grab them from your favorite retailer. I am going to go finish my next thriller manuscript right now. I was supposed to have this finished in April, so I am depressed that it is already July, but yay, America. Happy birthday to us. And in case you guys did not know, our national anthem is set to the tune of an old British drinking song, which is a totally American thing to do. I love it, and I love you guys. Thank you for being with me today. Now go forth and celebrate all month long, no matter what country you live in. And remember that gone does not mean forgotten, and it just might not mean gone either.
Sunshine.